Bibles, if you would, and go back to our scripture reading this morning. There's a couple of things I'd like to point out to you in Acts chapter 25. Not going to read that whole passage again, but a couple of these items are very important. In verse 3, pardon me? Oh, okay. So Acts 25 and verse 3, it says, "And desired favor against him that he would send for him to Jerusalem, laying wait in the way to kill him." I was reading this the other night, and I thought, that's what they kind of did with Luther too, isn't it? Yeah. And so the good prince carried him away to the Wartburg castle, but the Jews wanted him to come back from Caesarea to Jerusalem so that they could kill him along the way. Then it goes on and says here in verse 5, it says that he, "Let them therefore," said he, "which among you are able to go down with me and accuse this man if there be any wickedness in him." So he says, okay, now you go back with me and make accusations there, accuse him there. And when he had tarried among them more than 10 days, he went down to Caesarea. And the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, commanded Paul be brought. So he's back in Caesarea now, and he's having Paul brought before him as he's going to set in judgment upon him. And verse 7, it says, "When he was come, the Jews which came down from Jerusalem and stood round about and laid many and grievous complaints against Paul, which they" what? That's what I wanted you to see. The spirit of those people wanted to kill him. They made accusations against him which were false because they could not be proved. And we're seeing this going on right now in many areas, even within the church. But I wanted to see this application to what is going on in this election. There are all these accusations being made. Have you ever seen anybody provide the proof for it? These accusations, they just throw them around and expect the people to believe them. But the sad thing is the people do believe them with no evidence. So as we've been studying the first couple of sessions on this, I want us to consider, as we left the other one, we're going to be moving from the consideration of the semantical and historical significance of the political cultures of the things that we mentioned, such as Nazism and fascism, Marxism, communism, socialism. And I hope that these considerations that we've done had helped a little, giving us a better understanding of what they are and why they are so politically charged and erroneously thrown around to disparage individuals. Hopefully these greater insights can help us better discern why these terms are so frequently perverted today in order to stir up strife and opposition. And because of the negative and revolting connotations conjured up by some of these words, many in the political as well as the educational and media realm are using them to attack, to demean, to distort, to divide, and destroy both individuals and ideas. And that is so sad. Statements or charges against an individual without substantiating facts is not only slanderous, it's sinful. To believe and to promote or perpetuate such sinful actions make us a partaker of those sins and shows a lack of intelligence and compassion and Christian virtue. So don't get caught up in any of that stuff. An example of this can be seen in the unsubstantiated claim this week by one of the candidates running for president, made the statement that Donald Trump told General John Kelly that he would like to have generals like Hitler's. Have you seen that come across the news? It's coming across everywhere. Trump said he wants generals like Hitler. Somebody doesn't have their brain working. They just really don't. The insanity of such an accusation and the gullibility of those who readily accept such unverifiable and vilifying accusations is amazing. Do they not realize that in the first 12 years of Hitler, from 33 to 45, there were 42 attempts to assassinate him? 42 in 12 years. And many of these were his leading generals. And most everybody, we probably don't know the names of most of the generals, but everybody knows who Rommel was, the one that was the counterpart to Patton. He had to commit suicide or they were going to kill him, because even Rommel was involved in one of the assassination attempts. If I were somebody, I wouldn't want generals like that. I don't know about you. But because a man that hates Trump, who got fired by Trump, put that in a book, now they're putting it out there as if it's truth. And there's not one shred of evidence anywhere. I don't know. I don't follow most of that. Every just now and then I see something come across and I look at it. So whether he did or not, I don't know. But we would do well to remember the words of Jesus when he said, "For by thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned." Beware of what you say or even what you believe concerning what others are saying. These politically charged, slanderous misrepresentations of truth are prevalent throughout our educational system, from our elementary all the way through postgraduate universities. It's true in both the world or the secular education as well as the Seventh-day Adventist. And it's encouraged on all sides, even by professed Christians. I cannot call people Christians when their evidence in their life shows that they profess one thing and there's something else. They profess it. This stands in stark contrast to some teachers in some of our schools. I shared with you last week, one of the schools right here in Texas, telling their classes on repeated occasions such things as, if Trump becomes president, he will gather up your friends and families and deport them. Now remember, this was over a decade ago. Did Trump become president? Did he deport your friends and family? But they made those accusations back in 2015, prior to the election in 16. They made them. Aren't they saying the same thing again today? It looks like they could come up with some, well, they have come up with a whole lot of new lies, but this is something that's going on. I mentioned also they compared one of our schools, teachers, compared Trump's book on Make America Great to Mein Kampf, which was Hitler's book while he wrote while in jail before he took over the Nazi Party. Now I want us to look at some things. This stands in stark contrast to these statements from Inspiration. Those who teach the Bible in our churches and our schools are not at liberty to unite, making apparent their prejudice for or against political men or measures. So this forbids standing in school and making those kind of statements to these students. This is one of the problems that's happening with our young people today. This dumbing down of America has become greater than it's ever been. Yeah. It really is. Every teacher, minister, or leader in our ranks who is stirred with a desire to ventilate his opinions on political questions should be converted by a belief in the truth, or do what? Give up his work. These are strong, strong statements here. Getting involved in these political questions. Those teachers in the church or in the school who distinguish themselves by their zeal in politics should be relieved of their work and responsibilities without delay, for the Lord will not cooperate with them. So such strong statements as this, and yet we have people still promoting their politics. Even a lot of our independent ministries, it's unbelievable what some of them are saying of what's going on in this election. It's sad, but it's happening. So today I want us to take a little bit of time and consider where the remnant prophet stood. Did Ellen White intend to condemn only political strife, on scheming, and dishonest manipulations that we looked at last time? Or did she intend to discourage orderly exercise of the vote and serious study of political science? Since the expressions politics and political were penned by Ellen White during the latter half of the 19th century, an understanding of the character of political affairs in the United States at that time may aid in ascertaining the accurate meaning of these terms. These terms as Ellen White intended them to be understood, and as they no doubt were understood by the readers at that time that she wrote them. So let's take a look at what it says about politics in that time. Candidates fought political campaigns on the basis of personality or inherited prejudice. That was happening when she wrote these words. Is that happening today? Again, at the time that she wrote these things, it said that business ran politics, and politics was a branch of business. It could have been written yesterday. Another statement from that time. The country after the election of 1888. So we're going back 136 years here now. And this is what the view of politics were at the time of the prophet. The country after the election of 1888 had reached the last stages in the history of the Roman Empire when offices were sold at public auction to the highest bidder. And then I want you to look at this. Politics seem to be increasingly corrupt and run by sordid professionals. Professional politicians who schemed and cheated and lied and became increasingly corrupt. And now, it began to look as though the national government had only one reason for existence: to promote the interest of the dominant party through proper distribution of the spoils. You know, as I was reading some of those historical statements, it sounds like today it was written. So the position that she held back then was the position of politics back then, and it seems to be the same as it is today. A brief consideration of our history provides a great insight on this. During the formative years of the Seventh-day Adventist movement, the United States was involved in turbulent political currents. The issues that resulted in the outbreak of the Civil War were much agitated before the 1860 national election. So we had the problem. This nation was about to go into war, a civil war. And of all wars, I can't think of any war worse than a civil war, when brother is killing brother, or son, father, or the other way around. Civil war is where it tears the whole nation and the families that comprise that nation apart. And I shared this with you Well, I'm going to share something else. This is something that James White wrote in the Review and Herald, August 21st, 1860. Watch this. The political excitement of 1860 will probably run as high as it has for many years, and we would warn our brethren not to be drawn into it. So don't get drawn into the political excitement. That's the warning. We are not prepared to prove from the Bible that it would be wrong for a believer in the third message to go in a manner becoming his profession and cast his vote. Now, remember, what we're looking at is so many people are saying it's a sin to vote, it's wrong to vote, or if you vote, you're going to carry the sin to the guy you voted for, and all these different things that are going on. But we see in 1860, we already acknowledge the fact that it is not wrong for a believer to go vote and cast his vote. The church made no decision on that, but that was some of the conflict at that time. We do not recommend this, neither do we oppose. Now, here's a reasonable thought. If a brother chooses to vote, we cannot condemn him, and we want the same liberty if we do not. You shouldn't judge somebody if they vote, and you should not judge them if they do not vote. That judgment is not left to you. That's left to the conscience of the individual, and we have no right trying to regulate or rule over that. So 2 years later now, in August of 1862, a year after Abraham Lincoln was voted in as president, here's what James White said, and I showed you this last week. Those of our people who voted at all at the last presidential election to a man voted for Abraham Lincoln. Every one of our people who voted for Abraham Lincoln. Did they vote for Lincoln because he was a Republican? Remember, the Republican Party didn't exist until Lincoln. He was the first Republican president we had. They didn't vote for him because of a political party. They voted on the issues at hand and not the man. And if you vote on the issues and not the individual. This is readily seen in the resolution adopted at the General Conference session of 1865. In that General Conference session back then, it had a heading on the session's notes of voting, and watch. Resolved that in our judgment, the act of voting, when exercised in behalf of justice, humanity, and right, is in itself blameless and may be at some times highly proper. Notice what they're talking about, though. Some issues here. In the behalf of justice, humanity, and right. Okay? Now it goes on and says, this is, remember, General Conference session, but that the casting of any vote that shall strengthen the cause of such crimes as intemperance, insurrection, and slavery, we regard as highly criminal in the sight of heaven. These were not political questions. These were questions in the realm of morals and ethics. To vote for crimes, insurrection, intemperance, slavery is highly criminal in the sight of God. This is the position we took as a people 2 years after Seventh-day Adventism was organized. But we would depreciate any participation in the spirit of party strife. Don't get caught up in these party strifes. You know, when I went to vote the other day, there's parties I'd never even thought of. Some of those had as many as 5 different parties on there. A Green Party, a Libertarian Party.
Did you go to the parties?
Yeah. They didn't give me a hat and a horn, so I didn't go. Yeah, but all of these different parties that people are supposed to be pulled into, you go through and you look at the issues of where individuals stand, and then you will come through it safely. This is seen in this statement of where we as a church stood at that time, regardless of what some of the independents are trying to tell you today. Inasmuch as many are not familiar with the church's history on the subject of voting, I think it would be beneficial to consider some expressions of Adventist thinking over the last 88 years. That goes back a little time. And look at what they had to say during that period of time. Pastor Francis McClellan Wilcox, we often refer to him as F.N. Wilcox. You probably heard of him. You even have some of his books. And Wilcox had this to say in March 26, 1936, that reads this: "What relation should Seventh-day Adventists sustain to the question of politics? Is it proper for them to exercise the right of franchise, to go to the polls and cast their votes?" 1936, so this is going still way back. Is it proper? What should be our relation to these issues? We believe that this is their God-given and undeniable right, and this right they have chosen to exercise through all the years. We were established as a free country who had elections. Many countries in the world, you can't vote. We need to be thankful that the God-given right that we have is to participate in what happens within the nation we live in. And it says through all the years. Watch. Is it right for a Seventh-day Adventist to hold political office? We touched on that in our very first session. Based upon the history of the children of God through the centuries, I must believe that this is consistent with Christian faith and practice. You won't hear that today. It is not for the church to advise any man to accept political position, nor has the church the right to deny any of its members this privilege and right. Review and Herald, March 26, 1936. Another article entitled "The Preacher and Politics" appeared the same year, but it was in August. Watch this one. "It is natural that every man, whether preacher or lay member, should have an interest in national and international questions." We live not only in a nation, we live in the world. You do know that. Right. And we should know what's going on around the world. But, I think I mentioned this to some in a discussion or something. I was talking to a Canadian guy several years ago, and he said, you don't really have news down there south of the border. He said, what you have are community announcements. In other words, we don't cover much of anything except like certain events within this country. I'll give you an example of that. I was in Greece several years ago, and I left Athens one morning to go to the airport. Got to the airport, and everything seemed to be fine. I mean, it was just like the other days that I was there. Got to the airport, and I flew up to Munich. Checked into a hotel. I turned the television on. My mother was with me. And, it's been a long time since I've lived over there, so my German isn't really, really good. I can make some people think I'm extremely fluent, but I'm not. They think I'm fluent because they just don't know what I'm saying. And I'm watching the news, and what I could pick up was that a riot was taking place in Athens. And they were burning cars and overturning cars. They were breaking it, kind of like what happens in this country a lot of times. I said, Mom, I'm not sure, but I think that Athens went crazy as we left, and they're tearing everything up. So I went through the channels and I finally found BBC. They speak pretty good English. They speak real English. And I'm listening to them, and sure enough, about the time we left, it really got bad and those riots and everything started. You know, I got back here to the U.S. A little later, probably a week later, and I had not met one person who had known that riot had taken place in Greece. So that's what the Canadian guy was talking about. We don't really get a view of things. And so anyway, it's natural we should be having an interest in the national as well as the international questions. There can be no question as to the wisdom and propriety of workers considering these great world problems in the light of divine prediction. That's prophecy. Indeed, this is necessary to prophetic exposition. If you don't know what's going on around you, both in the local area and from there spreading out into the whole world, you can't really know what's happening in the prophetic realm. And if you don't know it, you sure can't expound on it. You can't present it to somebody. Is it proper for the minister of the gospel to exercise the right to franchise? Now, that word franchise we don't use much, but it means to vote. I believe that he may properly do this. The Apostle Paul, in seeking protection, that's what we read in our scripture reading in Acts 25, in seeking protection from his enemies, appealed to the fact that he was a Roman citizen and was entitled to the protection which this citizenship guaranteed. This is quite different from acting as a partisan in a political field, electioneering and arguing and contending for political measures and decrying the policies and the candidates of opposing political parties. So that's saying you don't get involved in calling them names or believing things or spreading things that have not been verified. Very definite instruction has been given that our ministers and the teachers and managers in our schools should keep entirely out of the general field of politics so far as carrying forward any agitation is concerned. You see, our forefathers knew these things, and they moved that way, but a lot of these independent things are actually taking a political position and pulling things out from before we actually became an organized body. Dealing specifically with the warning statements by Ellen White concerning Adventist attitudes to political affairs, 1940 Review and Herald carried this statement: "Is it possible to heed this counsel and at the same time exercise our right of franchise in national and state elections?" We believe what? It is. It is to heed the counsel of God and still exercise the right to vote if we are dealing with issues and not political strife. Okay. He goes on. One can vote for certain men and measures. He can give his support by ballot to ways and means which make for the good of the state and society, and at the same time keep free from control or domination or spirit of some political party which advocates the measures which he approves. We know of many brethren who have done this for years. They engage in no political agitation or discussion, privately or in public. They do not pose as the arbiters or supporters of any particular political party. They seek always to recognize what? Principles apart from the above men. If they vote, they do not link their interests with such parties. They cast their vote for the candidates who, in their judgment, are best qualified for particular offices without reference to party affiliation. We cannot believe that in so doing they violate the spirit and instruction which we have received. When one becomes partisan, when he dabbles in politics, seeks to unduly influence votes, links himself with some political party to work for its measures and its candidates, regardless of the principles involved, it is the spirit against which we are to be warned. These are some very, very strong statements. Now we move forward to October 23rd, 1952. McElney, who for 16 years was president of the General Conference, this appeared in the Review and Herald. The church has never attempted to instruct its members as to how they should vote or for whom they should vote. These are matters that must be left to the members' individual conscience. This is important. Nor has the church placed any ban or censor on its members if they, as qualified citizens, choose to exercise their right to vote, or on any who may choose not to vote. I thought this was an interesting thing in here. He said that the members, if they are qualified citizens, and that jumped right out at me because we're allowing unqualified non-citizens to vote in this country now. Something's going to have to give somewhere. In a previous article, this is what we read. We believe every member is entitled to exercise his or her right of franchise. The stability and foundation of good government rests upon who? The people. And the way that we help with the stability and the foundation of a good government is by having a voice concerning that government. Goes on and says, if those who are stable and law-abiding, it's another interesting thing. Now they're wanting to let even people in prison charged with felonies to be able to vote. Abiding, have a high regard for principles of good government, hold themselves aloof. Now watch that. They don't want to pay any attention to what some of these principles are. Hold themselves aloof from the task of choosing good and fit men for governmental leadership. They thereby make themselves responsible for the failures in government. And then, this is a responsibility good citizens should seek to avoid, insofar as their vote makes this possible. It is important that all issues that are to be placed on the ballot should be carefully studied by every conscientious voter. Does this make sense? But it is so different than what we're hearing today. As Christians, we are to uplift Jesus at all times and in all places, to uphold and defend the moral and the ethical instructions of God's Word, even in the face of the most severe adversity. We are to exemplify through our lives the teachings and commandments of God, and to show others through words and actions the paths of righteousness. In addition to this, we are to endeavor to protect life. Now stay with me through this. And we are to protect life, whether inside the womb or out, and promote well-being, to preserve the sanctity of marriage and safeguard the family. Every Christian should be called to do that. We will aid in the proper promotion of sensible plans for the extension of health, seeking to relieve the needs and fears of the hunger and distress of suffering humanity. It's amazing how much of humanity suffers today. I've been in parts of the world where people just weep when you come to their house, and when you bring them a gift of some sort, it's just something that they're not used to in some places. Through voice and pen and vote, We are to strive for stability of the social and political order, striving always to maintain religious and other proper freedoms. And with this understanding and under the appropriate conditions, we are to cast our vote or refrain from voting as our conscience and deliberate judgment leads us. We should never condemn anyone who, under full consciousness of the Spirit and doctrine of Christ, may decide to devote parts of his or her talents and time to the giving of sensible leadership to their local or national or even world community. On the other hand, as true Christians, we will weigh matters calmly. We will conduct ourselves with the strictest rectitude and dignity, ever seeking to fully and impartially be informed and inform others. And in every aspect of our functions, we should always seek to discharge first and at all costs our ambassadorial obligations. You are ambassadors from heaven. As personal representatives of Christ, we are to represent things that are right before everyone. In answer to the question, is it a sin to vote? I would respond today, does not the church vote? Think about this. At every board meeting, a church votes. At every business meeting, the church votes. At every nominating committee, the church votes. At every executive and constituency meeting, the church votes. And have not members of the church been exercising the right to vote from the local to the federal levels around the world, as is allowed by the laws of certain places? Several statements from the pen of inspiration now should be extremely helpful in sorting this out. First of all, look at this. The Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government, providing that representatives elected by the popular vote shall enact and administer the laws. Freedom of religious faith was also granted every man being permitted to worship God according to the dictates of his conscience. It's right straight from the great controversy, friends. Another one. Many deplore the wrongs which they know exist, but consider themselves free from all responsibility in the matter. How about that? This cannot be. Every individual exerts an influence in society. In other words, friends, you might deplore what's going wrong out there. There's a lot of stuff going wrong out there. And there's a lot of stuff going wrong in here too. And we deplore the wrongs, but we feel free from any responsibility. That cannot be. We must assume the responsibilities that are placed upon us both by God and by the nation in which we live. And here it is. In our favored land, every voter has some voice in determining what laws should control the nation. Wow. Should not that influence and that vote be cast on the side of temperance and virtue? This is what I'm talking about. Not the political issues, but the other issues that are so applicable to Christian witness and opposition to those sinful practices. Using this in the realm of temperance, watch this. The advocates of temperance fail to do their whole duty unless they exert their influence by precept and example, by voice and pen and what? And does that sound, by the way, this is the prophet speaking. Does it sound like she's opposed to voting? Does it sound like that she's opposed to raising our voices and addressing issues or writing books or articles on that? In favor of prohibition and total abstinence. We need not expect that God will work a miracle to bring about this reform and thus remove the necessity for our exertion. We ourselves must grapple with this giant foe. Our motto, no compromise and no cessation of our efforts till the victory be gained. And then still, what can be done to press back the inflowing tide of evil? Do you see an inflowing tide of evil today? Do we not see happening today what happened at the time of Noah when God said men's thoughts were evil continually? And they're continually devising new ways to be evil. And by the way, that cesspool of evil has no bottom. They can keep pulling out forever. Let laws be enacted and rigidly enforced, prohibiting the sale and use of ardent spirits as a beverage. You know, this reminds me of something here I want to share with you. His name just went away. Peter Marshall, chaplain of the U.S. Senate back in the Second World War period. And in one of the prayers that he had, as a matter of fact, you can buy the book of prayers of Peter Marshall. I recommend it highly. But he stood up there for that prayer and did not give some mamby-pamby, worthless carrying on that you see today in so many of these type of prayers. He shocked them all when he said, Lord, we do not ask you today to give us the wisdom to institute new laws. What we ask of you is that you give us the intestinal fortitude to enforce the laws we already have. Oh, if somebody would just pray that today. Watch this. The prosperity of a nation is dependent upon the virtue and intelligence of its citizens. To secure these blessings, habits of strict temperance are indispensable, and the history of ancient kingdoms is replete with lessons of warning for us. Luxury, self-indulgence, and dissipation prepared the way for their downfall. It remains to be seen whether our own republic will be admonished by their example and avoid their fate. The issues surrounding the current election, my friends, have probably caused as much agitation as anything in our lifetimes. There is no question that the issues are of tremendous magnitude, both in the political as well as the moral, ethical spheres. And in the midst of this dilemma, what should Christians do? Many here have probably never heard of someone by the name of Ida B. Wells. Anybody heard of Ida Wells? Ida B. Wells, W-E-L-L-S. Anybody ever heard of this lady? Oh, somebody's got to have heard of her. Devin, bless your heart. People forget people like this. In the late 19th and early 20th century, you might say that she was the early Rosa Parks, way before Rosa was born. Many have probably forgotten or never heard of Rosa's tremendous contribution either to the civil rights 65 years ago. It cost her her job and brought her several death threats. I wish there was more time to share with this woman, but I want to go back to Ida Wells for a minute. She was an author. She was a civil rights activist. She was a newspaper editor, a suffrage and franchise, freedom to vote, reformer, and co-founder of the NAACP. but most never have heard of this woman. Her last words, penned as she lay dying at her desk, or she was at her desk dying, and this is what she wrote before she passed away in Chicago in 1931, more than 25 years before Rosa. And her words were, "Eternal vigilance, the price of liberty." Last words of Ida B. Wells. Eternal vigilance, the price of liberty. We dare not cease to be vigilant, knowing what lies before us. And dare we remain passive and lethargic and disenfranchised? Several statements from the pen of inspiration should be extremely helpful in sorting this out and giving us a much clearer understanding of the issues. Again, from the Review and Herald of 1881. Many deplore the wrongs which they know exist, but consider themselves free from all responsibility in the matter. This cannot be. See, this bears repeating. You cannot think that you're going to be free from all responsibility by doing nothing. If we are indifferent to the task of choosing good leaders for our government, our negligence makes us responsible for the failures in our government. Notice this. We talk of the results, tremble at the results, and wonder what we can do with the terrible results, while too often we tolerate and even sanction the cause. Is it not a reality that the condition of our country today is due largely to the silence and consent of the professed people of God? They don't speak out like they should. A page from Ellen White's diary in 1859 gives us some very enlightening thoughts. She said she attended a meeting in the Eve, had quite a free, interesting meeting. After it was time to close and the subject of voting was considered and dwelt upon. So at the end of these meetings, now a subject of voting came up. James first talked, then Brother Andrews talked, and it was thought by them best to give their influence in favor of right and against wrong. They think it right to vote in favor of temperance men being in office in our city, instead of by their silence running the risk of having intemperance men put in office. This is the position our pioneers held. It was the issues that they were dealing with. In the early summer of 1881, at a camp meeting in Des Moines, Iowa, a resolution was placed before the delegates that were there. And I want you to see what it was. Resolved that we express our deep interest in the temperance movement now going forward in this state, and that we instruct all our ministers to use their influence among our churches and with the people at large to induce them to put forth every consistent effort by personal labor and at the ballot box in favor of the prohibitionary amendment of the Constitution, amendment of the Constitution, which the Friends of Temperance are seeking to secure. Now, some objected to this clause, which called for an action at the ballot box, and urged that that word or that phrase be removed, be deleted. And Mrs. White, who was attending the camp meeting, had retired, and she was summoned to give counsel about that. She'd gone back and gone to bed, and this is what she had to say later. They came to get her. She'd gone to bed. They came to get her out of bed. Think about that. Wouldn't it be great if we had a prophet that we could just go get her up, get him up, or whoever? Say, come on, we got a question we need some answers to. And then the prophet comes, gives us the answer, goes back to bed, and we ignore everything the prophet said. All right, but look at this. What's what she said? She says, I dressed and found I was to speak to the point of whether our people should vote for prohibition. I told them yes and spoke 20 minutes. So she answered the question with a simple word. Yes, you should. You go to the ballot box. And then she spoke for another 20 minutes and then went back home, went to bed. This is what our pioneers were doing and teaching. In these last days, Satan has sought to confuse the distinction between good and evil. He has been working with great power and success to bring a loathsome lethargy upon the people of God. And at this time, the power of his satanic inspiration is moving agencies to carry out a great rebellion against God and that commenced in heaven, while the servants of God remain strangely silent and fatally passive. Very few of God's remnant people seem to realize that this matter even concerns our children. For God's purpose for our children is wider and deeper and higher than our restricted vision comprehend. I shared a little of this with you in our first session, and I want to share these thoughts as we prepare to close today. From the humblest lot, those whom he has seen faithful have in times past been called to witness for him in the world's highest places. Who's she talking about? No, in times past. She's talking about people like Daniel and Joseph and Nahum and some others of the past that God rose up and put in high political positions. Not that they were politicians, but they were political presence in times past. Now watch what she goes on and says, though. And many a lad of today, so now she's bringing it home. Growing up as did David in the Judean home, studying God's word and his works and learning the lessons of faithful service, will yet stand in legislative assemblies, in halls of justice, or in royal courts as witnesses for the King of Kings. Did I say David? Yeah, well, and so this whole issue is dealing with people like David and Joseph, if you read the whole article. Now watch this. Multitudes will be called to a wider ministry. Our young people need to understand that God may want to use them in helping govern various parts of government, from the local city all the way to the federal. Another statement, just as powerful. Dear youth, what is the aim and purpose of your life? Are you ambitious for education that you may have a name and position in the world? Have you thoughts that you dare not express, that you may one day stand upon the summit of intellectual greatness? That you may sit, watch this, in deliberative and legislative councils and help to enact laws for the nation? And there is nothing wrong in these aspirations. Nothing wrong. But we try to tell our young people, have nothing to do with politics. I had somebody say here a while back, don't get involved in politics like Dr. Ben Carson because he's going against God's will. Who in the world do they think they are to judge Dr. Carson by their own feeble insights on things? Even today, many of our young people may be called to participate in public affairs. 1907, this is what I want to leave you with today. And I want to share with you too, those of you, I see a lot taking pictures of these slides. If you write on the sermon request thing that you want a copy of the slides, I can send you all of these photos that you may have them, but you have to just tell me you want them. So as we come down to the end, God holds them, speaking of the young people, responsible for the opportunities given them. The work before them is waiting for their earnest efforts, that it may be carried forward from point to point as the time demands. If the youth will consecrate mind and heart to the Lord's service, they may reach a high standard of efficiency and usefulness. This is the standard that the Lord expects the youth to attain. To do less than this is to refuse to make the most of God-given opportunities. This will be looked upon as treason against God, a failure to work for the good of humanity. Strong words, my friends. So I hope that what we have been looking at is helpful to you. I know many have already cast their vote, but at least you have this knowledge of what it's really all about, because unless the Lord comes speedily, we'll have another election after this one, and I'm tired of elections. This is another thing I did not share, but it was intimated with how the money that's used. Anybody know how many billions of dollars were spent on this election by just the two presidential candidates, not taking in all of those other people? I don't, but it's billions. In one week, one of these people raised over $1 million. They're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars. And to what? To try and promote a political position. So keep those points in mind as we conclude today. We're going to conclude with the hymn, I Am Thine, O Lord, number 552.